Good morning. Good morning to our second lecture as part of the AC workshop Expo 35. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Jannis Renner. Jannis Renner is a AAC alumnus, I think one has to say, in the singular. And he does something which I think is very interesting for the course because it is the nation pavilions. Even though the design task is not the nation pavilions in itself, the nation's pavilions relationship to your urban design and the development of nation pavilions will tell you a lot about the rest of the Expo site. Jannis was with us, I think, in 2017 at the Tehran City Garden workshop, and he's now, since then, I think, he's working with ATELIER BRÜCKNER. He studied in Konstanz, and he's also teaching in Konstanz, and I'm very happy that he suggested to contribute to this workshop, and so I ask you to welcome Jannis Renner back to AAC. Thank you.
Hi everybody. It's also really an honor for me to be here today. It's nice coming back after almost 10 years, also back to Hamburg the first time again, so it's really nice to be back here and to now talk a little bit of what I have been doing in the past 10 years, or especially in the past 2 years. I will not only talk about the Expo Pavilion that I did in Osaka, but I asked myself a little bit a broader question also to what Expo might need to change. So to really, since you are focusing on a more broader level for the Expo in Berlin, to really think also to not only on the building itself, but what also is the core value maybe nowadays of Expo. As Enno mentioned, I work at ATELIER BRÜCKNER. I don't know if the office is known for you or to you. We are quite internationally working and have an approach that I find also, especially for Expo and for working with different content, with different countries, with different cultures, is quite important. You here can see on the picture one of the Expo pavilions we actually did in 2012. So we work really in a studio way, really creatively, and trying to bring all the ideas together, visualize them always, to not forget all the input that we might get from the different points. We do work extremely internationally. So here you see a little bit the projects over the world that we have been realizing in the past 25 to 30 years almost already. And who are we? Who is the office ATELIER BRÜCKNER? We have 6 partners around Jannis Brückner, the founding partner of this office. But of course behind we are a bigger team. We are the ones that work on this many projects at the same time. I think right now around 30 projects going on. So we are roughly 130 members. Of course, this goes always a little bit up and down. But what I think is so important and such a important element for also today's discussion maybe is that we come from 30 different nationalities, right? So we are extremely international team. Because we work so international, we always try to have native speakers in the teams that work in the different countries so that we can really also interact with the clients on the site, but also know the cultural values from these countries. I think this is something extremely important. And what also for Expo is quite helpful, I would say, is our variety of disciplines. So we are not only architects, we're not only exhibition designers, but we have historians, we have graphic designers, we have sound designers, light designers. So we are really a broad spectrum of interdisciplinary work disciplines together, and this enriches, of course, also the way of working. And what do we do? As I said, we of course do expo pavilions, but we do also museums, refurbishments, visitor centers, experiences, exhibitions. Some of the German guests here might know the Börse in Frankfurt that you see in the news once in a while or every day almost. So we do really a broad spectrum of projects, but always cultural. And this, I believe, is one of the nicest way of working, because these are these cultural amazing projects that we are allowed to always create for our clients. And on top, we are, yes, of course, working in architecture and in interior architecture and exhibition, but as I said, we are always trying to get and take a holistic approach, meaning we also look really deeply into the light and the sound design, so soundscaping for exhibitions or for spatial experiences, interactive installations or media environments. So we really try to take a holistic approach at any project that we take on, and create an entire visitor's experience for everybody that is using our building. And this can be for a cultural center. We just did in Stuttgart refurbishment of an old industrial building with artist workshops. This can be quite broken down, or it can be, as Enno called yesterday, that the black box, this own world within an architecture that really is this immersive element. So it doesn't always have to be immersive, but it can be. And so we work in all different kinds of topics, history, expo, mobility, archaeology, etc., etc., etc. And this is something that is extremely interesting for us, because every project is something new. We get to dive into a completely new subject, be it a museum about chocolate, be it a museum about cars or about science. You learn new things. We did a museum about watches, where the project manager had to understand how the watch, the little things work. We took it apart to demonstrate this to the visitors. So every time you immerse yourself into a completely new subject and learn about the subject. And this is exactly where and how we are working, where we're coming from. We have this guiding principle. All of you probably know form follows function from Sullivan. Our founder changed this into form follows content. So we think every project from the content, from the central element, and try to make every visitor understand this content. So that through your experience, without having it written on the wall, you understand what is the content of the project. And this is a quite scenographic methodology, but we also use this for architecture. And I think this is a quite interesting and unique approach as well, to create this partitura to design. Before I dive into the expo part, maybe a few projects that you have seen of us, just to give you an understanding of our latest realized projects. So the Grand Egyptian Museum, I think, was something quite big that was opened last year, where we did the Tutankhamun gallery, the first time that the Tutankhamun is exhibited again with all his findings as one element, which is of course internationally renowned. But we also have done, for example, the Swiss National Museum in Zurich a few years ago, or in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, some projects. And ongoing, of course, we are trying to create a lot of new projects as well at the time. And this is, I think, something quite interesting, where we, of course, sometimes work as the architect. In this case here, the National Museum of Uzbekistan, we work together as a lead architect with Tadao Ando, who did the concept design at the very beginning. But then also we work with other architects as Chipperfield for the National Archaeology Museum in Athens, where we do only the exhibition, and Chipperfield won the competition for the architecture. So we try to always bring it together, and also work in collaboration with a lot of other architects and designers. But, and this is, I think, one of the main subjects today, we have also had the chance to build some Expo pavilions in the past. The latest ones you see down, which are two national pavilions we realized now on the Expo in Osaka, which is the Uzbekistan pavilion and the UAE pavilion. For the Uzbekistan pavilion, we did the whole thing, so the architecture exhibition inside, the whole package. For the UAE pavilion, we only did the exhibition, and the architecture was done by Ishigami from Japan. But in the past, we have also done already in Hannover the Cycle Ball as a experience, not a national pavilion, but also an experience pavilion, or the Caltex pavilion for an energy company in Korea. I want to now really quickly explain you a little bit of our project approach to one of the buildings of the Uzbek pavilion, to dive into a little bit deeper into one of the projects, and then we will discuss, or I will explain a little bit how I see the Expo and go through different examples and projects. So the Garden of Knowledge was the topic for this Expo pavilion for Uzbekistan. And we actually started, or we had a great chance to develop the content of the pavilion, the content what the client wants to show, what the nation wants to show, together with the client. So we were there from scratch, which is something that is not usual. Normally, a country thinks of the topic, what do they want to demonstrate, what do they want to show, and then do a competition or approach a designer to illustrate this. But we had really the chance to think together with the client, what does your country make, what is great of your country, what do other people want to see about your country. So Uzbekistan, I don't know how many people of you know a lot about Uzbekistan. I didn't before, I must admit. Uzbekistan is part of the Silk Road, of the ancient Silk Road. Samarkand maybe is a city that is known, and therefore is known for trade and knowledge exchange in the past. And this is where we stumbled across this Louis Kahn quote: "The first school probably began under a tree." So what does learning, what does knowledge need? What does a school need? Is it enough to just have a tree? A bunch of trees, a forest, you gather around, you have a protection, and you can exchange, you can learn. And we wanted to take this understanding, this element that the caravanserai in Uzbekistan in the built environment represents, to reflect the history and the rich culture of Uzbekistan. So diving in inspiration from the Uzbek culture, you look at the rich building tradition history, the Bukhara fortress from 900, the craftsmanship building with wood. It's a mosque in Khiva in the south of Uzbekistan, but of course also the landscape, the leftover ruins, and the rich work with materials. So you dive into all the different topics of the country to understand the culture, to understand where they're coming from, what is this heritage that you want to show, that you want to make in a completely different world in Japan, to make the visitors understand. So our decision was to take inspiration from the culture and the landscape, the caravanserai, and to literally cut out a piece of the landscape and to bring it to Japan, from the understanding, from the concept. So what does this mean? We cut out a piece, we have the forest, the nature on top, and this garden as a symbol of people coming together. And this we transform into our exhibition building, into our national pavilion to take to to Osaka. The roots, the soil, the basis, the roots that are somehow the heritage for innovation, the heritage for the future. The landscape, the top where you experience, where you interchange, and the garden, so a sculpture, a wooden rooftop that creates a space for exchange. And this is really our strategy for the whole building, for the whole pavilion. we have this immersive space that invites the visitors to discover and to know Uzbekistan better, to have a seat within the earth, to become part of this growing process, of this development, of the innovation, and then through an incubator, as we called it, this blooming, the transformation, you rise up and come into this garden for the garden where you can then encounter and exchange. Build, this is now one detailed picture, you will see more pictures throughout the presentation, but build, we transformed it literally into something like this. So you can see it is already here you can see somehow the stacking, the modularity of this sculpture, of the wooden sculpture on top, that is, yes, something abstract, it's a sculpture, it's something that catches your eye, but it reminds you immediately, if you look, onto the heritage, onto where are we coming from, onto the transformation of the Uzbek culture. And if you take this image and then go over to the next, so to say, what did we do, what did we transform, and how do we, and did we rethink the tradition and the heritage of Uzbekistan. The stone as a base gives us the chance to really demonstrate a black box as an immersive experience, to prepare the visitors, to make them understand more about the culture, because it is quite interesting how many overlapping traditions and elements the Japanese and the Uzbek culture actually have, but how little they know of one another. So for us it was really important to show exactly this, to show the Japanese there is a rich heritage in the, for example, wooden craftsmanship. You see this in here in this picture. You have the Japanese ring, the grand ring from Fujimoto in the front, and you have our wooden sculpture in the back. We didn't know the plot at that time. This is something about Expo that is always a little bit unknown. You don't know exactly where you sit. You don't know how does the ring look like, because it was not published yet. So you understand there is something, but that it would become such a correlation, that it actually also with this flooring, it almost does a mimicry, it almost floats into our pavilion. This is, let's be honest, also a little bit coincidence and luck. But we really tried to bring these cultures together, and luckily succeeded in a sense. But really quickly in 5 pictures, maybe through the building, so you understand a little bit what the visitors experience. We have the prologue. So prologue is the starting part of an exhibition that introduces the visitors, that sets the mood for the content, for the knowledge for the visitors. And we start really with this immersive space. The visitor literally ducks themselves into the ground. So you can see the clay, the real material on the sides, on the walls, on the ceilings, on the floor that is going into this tunnel. In the tunnel, you hear water noise. It gets colder through this climate of the materials only, and you feel yourself immersed into the ground. The exhibition itself, you are surrounded by earth. You are in this space that tells you in 3 subjects about education, innovation, and sustainability. Through projects, through different teaching approaches and other ideas on how to shape and find new innovations to bring the country further, but always with this understanding, how can we bring the country further and create innovation out of the heritage, out of what we know already, out of where we are coming from. And then in the center, you have a moving stage, we called it, or we had to call it. It's a 9-meter wide platform, a cylinder with a 360-degree film that shows you the heritage of the country in moving images, overlapping with the innovations that you have learned about before. And while you watch this movie, the platform rises and brings you to the top, but so slow that you don't notice it. And once the movie is over, you're on the top, on the terrace, and you step out, and you are in this garden. And we call this moving stage because in Japan this is not allowed to be built. You cannot build an elevator with a movie around, this is too dangerous. So we had to build a, how you call it, Achterbahn, roller coaster. So this moving stage is a roller coaster, officially. A really slow one, but that's why we also have rails on the side, because somebody could get hurt by touching the wall that is moving in 3.5 minutes, 4 meters. So it's not really fast, but still, there you already understand the cultural differences. In Japan, this is a rule. You have to follow this rule. You have to try to adapt to this rule and find a way to make it happen. And this actually is the first moving stage roller coaster / 360 degrees film ever built in Japan. So this was also an innovation itself for this Expo, although it is quite simply made, right? So this poetic space that you then reach on the top is having no exhibition content in the sense, right? So the idea here is really for visitors to sit down, to exchange, to think, to reflect, to have the possibility to look over the Expo. So it gives a place to linger and still creates also the connection back to the Expo, because you're standing up here and you can talk to the people down. So you have directly this connection again. After having immersed into this building, you suddenly are on the top, you don't know really how you got there, and suddenly you have this overview over the Expo. But moving on, I think Expo is more than only pavilions, right? Expo is not just this national pavilions that we built, but it's these cultures coming together, it's this exchange, it's a lot more. I think I don't have to tell you where Expo came from. This you probably already researched all yourself. You have read in the brief and or know it yourself already from before. But I think Expo always came from trying to demonstrate the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time, be it industrialization, new techniques to build, or be it nowadays more the sustainability. And it has spread all over the world. I found this map, I found it quite interesting to see where Expo has already been all over the world. And you see quite clearly it's this belt, right? Nothing in the south. South America, Africa is somehow left out. We have the central belt, mainly also in Europe, of course, focused. But it shows as well how Expo is all over the world. So it's always a chance from all over the world to bring together people, and it's a great opportunity to be also hosted all over the world, not always being in one spot like the Biennale in Venice, for example. And of course, always having these many different subjects, as I said, about the zeitgeist, the spirit, whatever wants to be showcased. And I think, especially in the past 15 years, starting with Dubai, somehow this focus on sustainability, now in Osaka also, designing future for future societies for our lives, which also had somehow the sustainability subject quite deep within. And the era of change, which will be in Riyadh, is something, we will see what comes out of it. Still have a little bit time to develop. But I think all of these things show that it's not only what is built, what is there, but it is also what is in between, right? So the world is not what we simply inhabit together, but what arises between us, as Hannah Arendt said. And I find this a quite nice quote, because for me this describes what is in between all of this built mess that we have each year or each 5 years. It is way more than just architecture or urban planning, it's this dialogue. And for me, this is somehow the three perspectives that I want to discuss today, that the dialogue through culture, through architecture, and through urban living is what we might need to think about when we think about the future of Expo. It's not only showing great architecture, but it's always this dialogue that is so important. So the idea behind what is culture, right? What is the culture of Expo? What is so important about the culture? I think the cultural exchange and this shared learning that Expo can provide is immense. This is unique. It's something bringing together almost all nations of the world onto one spot, and having this exchange is crazy. It's a crazy experience. That's why I brought this picture. The German restaurant in the Expo Pavilion in Osaka sold currywurst. The Japanese went crazy for that. For us, okay, the German culinary cuisine is maybe not as high as some other countries, especially the Japanese have a really rich food and cuisine, but they went crazy. They stood in line for hours to get a German currywurst. And food brings us together. Food is culture, right? And sometimes it's only this that you need. You share a meal together to start to exchange. It's food, it's music, it's dancing, it's how do you dress. So this culture and this cultural exchange is extremely important. And this is what you see on Expo. Here on the left, you see a parade on the Chilean National Day, where they wear their traditional clothing and perform their dances. So something I had never seen before. I didn't know that in Chile, I know this from South German Fastnacht a little bit, but in Chile, this is also tradition, right? Bringing this together, learning from another. Or in Qatar, a single musician sitting in front and just playing. He's a student. I talked to him. He was a student from Qatar that just volunteered to come to Osaka to play. And he played for hours every day, just to share his music and to show what is also something else that we might not know about the country. Or, and this is even more important, the kimonos in Japan. Also the locals come. This is on a Sunday on the Expo, where the Japanese traditionally on Sundays they dress up nicely and they go out. So what did they do? They dressed up nicely. They went to the Expo. They all day walking around in a kimono. This in Germany, I would never go in a Lederhosen or in a dirndl to a museum. This is not what I do, right? But in Japan, this is still part of their culture, of their tradition, and this helps you to understand what rich cultures, traditions a country might have, and to understand one another, to learn from one another. And I think this is the most important part, to learn from another and to learn also to see through the eyes of the other, right? How do they perceive? And this is something, this learning to see through the eyes of the other, what we tried also in the UAE pavilion in Osaka now, because what do you connect with UAE, with Dubai? It is skyscrapers, new cities in the desert, but it is not the rich cultural traditions of materials that they have, the fabrics that they weave, and how they have years and years and hundreds of years of traditions to do this. It's unknown, but the country has the chance to also show these unknown elements in the exhibitions. And I think this is something where cultures have the chance to present their values, where Expo becomes special. But of course, it can also be this as a reality, right? A representation, a nation branding that we might expect. Well, I personally expected a little bit, having lived in the US, knowing that this is really how the US wants to see themselves and wants to present themselves. This self-presentation event, making it an event, being there, painting this branding. Yeah, for me, this is rather a negative example, right? But of course, the US government, the US country thought something about doing this in that way. But for me, it is way more about sharing. An example in the Qatari pavilion, where Qatari and Japanese artists started to do art together and exhibit this art that they did together. So sharing a common bond with the hosting country and demonstrating what can bring you both together, working with locals and sharing the knowledge. So here you see they had their own vitrine and exhibition showcasing only comments of Japanese and Qatari history. What has happened together? What were the events, things, etc. And these are all the elements of sharing, of demonstrating, of learning that happens on the Expo. But thousands of people work at Expo, make Expo happen until it opens, before the visitors come. And this is also a bond that is created. I was quite often in Japan now for this Expo, and we were forced out of the traditions in Japan to work with only Japanese companies. They would not build for an international contractor. So we had to find a Japanese main contractor that builds and subcontracts all the Japanese companies. So, sorry. So we really had to learn, how does it work in Japan? We cannot go there as a German company and say, okay, I want to build this now, please do it. It doesn't work. I learned so much about this culture and how things work there, which is completely different of what, of course, visitors learned. But there are so many designers, so many people behind the scenes working in these countries to make Expo happen, that this exchange is something that also lasts. Because out of such a project, when you work good with a company or with a local architect or a client, then maybe another project might arise. So also collaborations come out of Expo that go beyond just exchange of knowledge on the visitor space. So for me, there are several questions. How do we go ahead with Expo, with this cultural part, with this exchange part? Is it still this pure representation of countries that is the relevant part, or is it more the interaction of the cultural interaction? How can we encourage this? How can we encourage collaborations? So as you see, I'm raising more questions than I'm actually giving solutions, but I think if I would have the solution, then I would have tried to change Expo already, right? So there is, of course, or if somebody has the solution, then we wouldn't be sitting here. I think this is a common search to find a way, how can we change it and how can we find a way. And this dialogue, of course, extends as well to the architecture, because in the end, the spaces are representing the cultural dialogue. So the idea of Expo being this space for innovation, for architectural icons that are created that will last forever. We have some examples. We discussed this yesterday. There are some icons that remain, right? So we have the Atomium, we have the Eiffel Tower, we have Habitat, we have etc., quite some buildings. But it is one building of the whole Expo. So what does remain? This is an example from, I think, a picture from not that old yet, from Hannover Expo, where it's the Lithuanian pavilion. I don't know if today exactly it still stands like this, but 2-3 years ago it still looked like that. Over 20 years after the Expo, it's just left over. So having the lack of actually doing something there, developing, and this is also what icon can survive or do survive, because most of them are left in ruins or destroyed, taken apart. And the ones that stay are so-called white elephants. White elephants meaning it's an icon that works as an icon, but can it work as something else, right? An Eiffel Tower, this Atomium, it works because it's an icon, but therefore it can only one of them can survive, because you don't need 60 icons standing around a city. You only need 1 or 2 maybe. So the question is, what can we do that these icons, these white elephants that each national pavilion somehow is on an Expo, become or get an after use, that they are usable for the future as well, that they are not only a symbol in the city, but that they can also function after the Expo. And I feel this is somehow an approach we have to find to get this long-term urban assets. And this is an example from 67 Expo in Montreal, the Habitat 67, which still works, right? I don't want to state wrong things, but I believe it's one of the only actually habitation functioning Expo pavilions, right? After that, we have never exhibited habitation on an Expo anymore, but this is a chance, it's fully lived. It's a huge complex, but every apartment is rented out. So it can work that still today the Expo pavilions are used. We just have to think, what is the afterlife of each pavilion? Can we find way? Of course, this was a really unique approach to exhibit habitation like this, which nowadays might not be for 60 national pavilions the right approach. This is clear, but we have to think of what can be the afterlife of a national pavilion. What is legacy? What can we do that this white elephant gets a proper after use? And in the Expo in Osaka, for example, all participants were forced per contract to hand over the pavilion plot as they found it before, meaning an empty piece of soil, taking everything out of the ground, all connections, all piping, everything out, just hand over your plot as an empty lot. And this, of course, already questions a little bit what does legacy mean, but knowing this, you, of course, can also, while you design your pavilion, think of, okay, I cannot leave it there because they don't want it. So how can I already, from the beginning, think of a legacy in a different way that might work? And this, for me, this is the Kuwaiti pavilion, didn't take that much legacy into account, right? It's a steel structure, extremely complicated, membrane that had to be imported from Europe because in Japan it doesn't exist. And I saw how it is taken down now. Wasn't allowed to take pictures, but there comes a crane, does this, done. This is not sustainability, right? This is built and then taken away. But even if, and this is somehow also said, even some structures, some pavilions, of course, do think, and already you can see that it is sustainable, right? The Grand Ring is modular. This is these amazing Japanese joints that hold, that you can take apart, that you can reuse, that is reversible, but Expo didn't think for a future of it. At the beginning, there was a press conference, I think, a month before Expo opened. This question was coming up from a lot of nations asking what will happen with this Grand Ring after Expo's over. They didn't have an answer. They just said, we don't know. They hadn't thought about it because in Japan, this is not usual that you recycle, that you reuse. So here, nowadays, I think this Fujimoto published this a few months ago. They are planning to keep 200 meters roughly as a symbol, as a structure. The rest will be burned. So you could take it apart, could use it for other things, but burning, is this the right solution? I don't know. So even though sustainability in the structure might be there, it doesn't guarantee, of course, that it works at the end or that there is a legacy afterwards. And this brings us back again to our Expo pavilion of Uzbekistan, because also here we had this thought in mind from the beginning to create a legacy, to make it reversible, to make it modular. And this is also something we discussed yesterday. Of course, a country will never say, yes, we will build the pavilion and then we will take it apart and ship it or bring it somewhere else, because they don't know if the pavilion is successful. They don't know if Expo will be successful, and a country will always do it for the media attention, etc. So we as designers planned it, not knowing if it will happen. right? So we previewed the idea of taking it apart, of being modular, not knowing if it will actually happen and be taken apart. And the pavilion, though, for Uzbekistan was such a success internationally that I think midway through Expo in July, they decided, okay, we are doing it. We are trying to get the funds, we are taking it apart, and we will do something with it. So each column, there's 286 of these columns of these trees. Those are full trunk trees from from Japan. All of these 286 columns, 149 equal triangles. We have two triangles, a small one and a big one. They're stacked on top of each other, creating 8 layers. It's a little bit of a domino playing, that they fit, that they have the column support, but they can all be taken apart, single piece by piece, been taken apart. And this has been happening now in the past month. And they were then stacked, put into containers, and they're being shipped to Uzbekistan. So now the question is, of course, is this sustainable? Taking a structure apart in Japan, bringing it all the way to Uzbekistan, which is literally half around the world. This is, of course, a valid question. The other solution would have been to burn it. So putting it on a ship, on a container, we need 20 containers for this structure. On a ship with 30,000 containers on it, is actually, we try to calculate it through, it is not that unsustainable, right? It is only a small part of this ship route, and therefore we are quite happy that it worked. And now it is somewhere, I think next week it will be arriving in Turkey. And it will become a central part of a new cultural hub in Uzbekistan. And I think this is something that is extremely, for the country, of course, is something extremely special. But they found a chance out of the exhibition to get the attention for the Aral Lake area, which is a triad area out of the Soviet times, and they want to revive this area. And south of this area, in Karakal, Pakistan, a republic within Uzbekistan, they are founded now in January an Aral school that will go and research on how to revive this area, and next to it there will be a children's library, and this pergola becomes part of the children's library. So the materials, the pergola is basically on the right side, we are not allowed to show the right side, is the Aral school. And the pergola is somehow the mediator, again, this space of encounter in between the two buildings. The library is on the right side, it's a small library for the children, and all sourced and built there locally. And I think, of course, it would be more sustainable to keep the building in Japan ongoing, to keep the pavilion as is, but sometimes it's not possible. And if you have to hand over the Expo site, if you don't have a chance to keep your building on site, then think about how you can take it away and what you can do with it. And I think this brings us to the materials, because this is something that is also quite important on Expo. That is, I'm missing the English word. In German, you would call it Materialschlacht. It's like a war of materials, a battle of materials, that everybody wants to showcase different kinds of materials and wants to show what is, how important they are or what innovations they bring. So it is somehow these three elements that you find on Expo. You have imported materials, a lot of imported materials, of course. Each culture wants to demonstrate themselves and show their heritage, show their cultural materials, where they're coming from, so they often have to import it. Then, of course, the local stuff. Of course, you try always to find also local materials. And then there is the innovations. What can you do new? What can you showcase new? And this also, last year, I'm showing a lot of examples from Osaka, of course. The Spanish pavilion built a pure wooden structure, which is quite sustainable, but then they cladded everything with glue, with tiles being produced in Spain and imported to Japan. And of course, this means, so all this blue surface is tiles and the yellow one as well. Because they wanted to showcase the traditions of the famous Spanish tiles. Yes, this is nice, but what ends up means they have to break it down and cannot reuse it because it's fully glued. It's imported from Spain to Japan, quite a long way, and nothing happens with it, right? And this in mind, because also Uzbekistan, as you had seen before with the blue tiles from Bukhara, is also famous for tiling. We wanted to showcase this also a little bit, but we tried to use only local materials to show, again, the dialogue of Uzbekistan and Japan. Meaning the wood is from 9 small forests around Osaka that is locally sourced. We actually were the first one to integrate a certain, like an NFC tag to be able to trace where the wood is coming from. So this became part of the exhibition. The guests could scan these tags and then get onto a website to see how this tree was cut down, etc., etc. So this became also part of the storytelling, of course, but we have the local trees, we have recycled Japanese bricks. So we walked around Japan and found a company that buys old bricks from destroyed buildings and recycles them, but this is not so much used in Japan yet. And we worked with them together to create our facade, already give the second life to the bricks from the beginning. And then this earth inside the pavilion, which is hundreds of square meters of clay and traditional Duma floor, it's called, it's a earth floor, is from the neighboring island of Osaka. So we try to really use only Japanese traditional materials to demonstrate and to showcase Uzbek traditions. Because, as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of correlation, there are a lot of things coming together. And of course, yes, sometimes you show the local heritage, in this case the Bukhara tiles that were handmade especially for this case, but it were 10,000 tiles. So they came in small boxes. It was not that much bringing over, but it gives an accent of in the whole pavilion, a certain spot locally that functions quite well to showcase, but it's not taking the whole pavilion out of this important material. And one last part of material we have, which we did for the Caltex pavilion in Korea. I think innovation is, if possible, always something that, of course, interests the visitors and creates interests for the Expo pavilion itself. This is a pavilion for GS Caltex, which is an energy company, and they wanted to showcase how they can, with their energy, create a sustainable future, and want to make the visitor feel how energy works, how the energy can flow through you. So we came up with this idea of walking as a person through these long, like as a little ant walking through a grass field. So you walk through these long plates that are illuminated, that you can control with the light. And it had never been done before. The highest one was by Makoto Architects in '95 with 9-meter heights. We then had 1 year to develop them with 80-meter heights, what we envisioned to happen. So we did prototyping, we found the material, we all locally in Korea though. So this is again innovation of a material, but locally innovated with the local companies together. And we wanted, of course, to showcase this, which is great if it works. It's amazing. Yeah? You can showcase something new that nobody has seen like this before, and it's of course extremely impressive to see this, to walk through this, and to make these plates shine. But at the same time, it's so unique. The company took them after to install them on their own headquarters, but we were lucky that they wanted them because, of course, it's something so unique you cannot reuse normally, right? You have these 80-meter plates. What will you do with them? So this is often the problem. Innovation has to be in a way as well that it might be reusable. So is it maybe innovative new materials that you can use also in other ways for the future, just showcasing the use of it? So this, of course, gives us the question, how can we design and not only hope for legacy? I think this is something quite important. And that this reversibility, this adaptability, or the transformability, or the temporary parts have to be a standard for Expo, which at the moment it is not really, right? It is building, showcasing, taking down, nobody thinks about it. And I think this is something that has to go deeper into the DNA of not only the designers, but also the designers and the Expo Association. And this DNA, this dialogue, brings us, of course, to the biggest part, the urban planning, which you are now working on, which is the idea of Expo, of course, always being a catalyst for the urban transformation. But that city grow and develop around the new Expo site, the new Expo field, that the Expo site is a new neighborhood. And I think this is something in Milano in 2015, which Herzog Dümmerer actually envisioned when they did the master plan. They wanted the Expo pavilions to all look the same, to only showcase a different landscaping within, but to all have the same shell. Expo didn't like it too much because then, of course, the national representation is gone, and well, it ended up becoming this. And years after, I think it stood almost empty also for a decade. They didn't know what to do with the site because it is this one main axis and these long, small plots, almost like casa chorizos, you call them in Argentina, these really small 20-meter long plots that only have a small front facade. The sides you cannot access because there comes the next pavilion, right? How is this workable for a future neighborhood? And of course, Expo Hannover is a fair. It looks like a fair, and of course it cannot work as something else as a fair, I feel. And this is, in my opinion, one of the main problems that Expo has had throughout, that we create these infrastructures, these plots, to be iconic. Iconic highlights with a central icon, this shaping of urban planning that, of course, for the use of Expo here in Dubai is amazing. For the visitors, it's nice. It's this event park that they can walk through. But is this really a functioning infrastructure urban planning for the future? So not only for 6 months, but for 60 years in city planning. And even now in Osaka, this ring somehow made us believe, we created this, or the Expo, Fujimoto created this communication space. The icon is not this one spear anymore, but it is this space for common exchange. You have a beautiful overview over the whole plot. It works extremely good, and there is a potential for legacy, but as I said before, Expo didn't plan for it. They didn't want it. They want to take it down. And exactly these things that they have a casino here in the backside. I think not this one here is the plot where they will build now a casino. So in a thought, it could have, when I heard this, I was like, okay, cool. They're building a casino and then they will redevelop the space inside because it is next to it is Disney World, Universal Studios. So Osaka has a lot of these adventure parks, so maybe this will become something like that, might work. But no. I asked AI to do it, so it's not, but in the end, what will remain is 200 meters of the ring. I don't know here or wherever, but from the picture, maybe this nature that they grew in the center, there was a little park, a little garden with trees, and some of the infrastructure. But the rest will be demolished, or burned, or taken away. And then they will rebuild everything, maybe in 10 years. But is this legacy? Huh? This is a picture I actually received this morning from Japan. This is our plot where our pavilion stood. So we, this morning, handed it over as to the Expo Association as we had founded 2 or 3 years ago. And this is how all the plots will look like. So this image, of course, is a little bit more rough, but it's not so far from what will happen within 1 year. In April is the day where everything has to be gone. So the other pavilions have until April to hand it over. And then everything will look again like before. And this, for me, is such a pity that the potential of actually using what was created there for millions and millions of euros is just gone again. Why? You could try to create something out of it. And I think this is something that in Riyadh they are planning to do. Questions, of course, how it functions. This is another question we will see. But they are taking another attempt to create more consolidated neighborhoods. So we see here quite clearly 5 districts that have all planned legacy concepts within. So they are already defining that the theme pavilions of Expo that are given out by the hosting country, that they will stay. They have a legacy after use defined that the architect, the designer that creates this pavilion has to assure that it works. There are other national pavilions that are planned as temporary, but also as remaining structures. So you can choose what you want to take. But they are defining actually that a lot of the structures have to stay. And if they're staying, they have to have a defined after use. Of course, again, is it public after use? Is it habitation? Does habitation in an Expo pavilion work? I don't know. But they're trying to get a first attempt to create a neighborhood out of this. And this is, of course, something that might work in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, where you still have the chance and the possibility to create Expo as a new neighborhood, like in the middle of nowhere. If you see what there is right now in Riyadh, it's sand. So, of course, they can create a full neighborhood in the middle of nowhere. This is, for you in Berlin, not really the answer, I would say. But you have a big chance because you actually do have an empty plot within the city that you can create something new. You can create this neighborhood that normally in Europe, if you go outside, it's not the way that a city is planned, that the urban infrastructure and the urban planning works. But in your case, in Berlin, you have quite this big chance to densify the city, to create something new, to create this new impulse to revive this area of the city and to actually create something lasting. So how can we create infrastructures for decades is maybe a question, and not only for these 6 months, to think further how, for example, as you saw, our Expo pavilion was a triangle. This triangle was given. It's the plot. Can you maybe, if you plan the infrastructure, the urban planning, make sure that the plots are also usable afterwards for more proper buildings that can last, and not only these quite unique white elephant pavilion plots. So there are a lot of ways to think and to go beyond and to already take into consideration from the get-go, as you're doing now, what comes after, what is the legacy mode. And I want to mention also what Paulo Mendes da Rocha said. The problem is not to build, but to build with meaning. So I think we all know we can construct this. We can construct beautiful Expo pavilions, but what is behind and how can we think further and how can we bring in this legacy understanding, what stays actually. And I think what stays is one part, it's dialogue. Because everything is connected, everything is us talking to each other, especially nowadays. And that's why maybe through most of my presentation I was quite critical on how Expo is going, and yeah, we have a lot of negative examples how we should not do it, but I still believe we have to do it. That means we have to find a way to do it, because dialogue nowadays is more important than ever. In this political world that we are living in right now, we have to talk. And Expo is a chance, a unique chance to bring everybody together to talk, to exchange. I was telling this yesterday, when we were constructing the pavilions, we had some companies working on different pavilions. So our light design, electrical light contractor was working on the Saudi Arabian pavilion, on the Spanish pavilion, on the German pavilion, on our pavilion, on the UAE pavilion, on I think 9 pavilions. And he always said, I have to go to Saudi really quick, then I will go to Spain, but we'll see each other later in England. So suddenly this world of Expo became countries. You met then the Spanish architect that was standing there. So you exchanged, you had really an insight into these different cultures on such a condensed space. And this is something unique. And this is something we have to keep, because dialogue, in my opinion, is this exchange of knowledge, but dialogue is what binds everything together, what keeps us as human beings somehow going. And this is for me more important more than ever nowadays. And for me, this comes somehow with these 5 points that we have to consider for the future. Designing for tomorrow before building today, the legacy first, remembering that what comes after, and creating more public space, because what you maybe saw now also in the Expo or in all these other urban planning sites, yes, it is about showcasing pavilions, but there are hundreds of thousands of visitors coming. In Osaka, there were, I think, roughly 200,000 per day. They are running around. Yeah, they sit down somewhere and then they run to the next pavilion, but there was no space to actually encounter, to communicate, to get a dialogue, to learn from the people that you meet there, because there's all the nations as visitors together. And this is so interesting to also create these places of encounter, not only for display. And of course, modular transformable architecture is beyond the event, is a key for the future, and the urban integration, as we just saw, to not only have an event island, but to make it become part of the city. And there, of course, the question is, can it be scattered within the city? Does this work? This, again, doesn't work for Expo, maybe. So it does have to somehow stay condensed as one neighborhood, but has to have a future. And this is, I believe, something also quite important, to get away from this pure self-representation and more into this dialogue, into this collaboration, to theme-driven collaboration maybe, where really also the Expo or the countries themselves give themselves the task to collaborate with the hosting country, with other countries, and showcase that also this dialogue can create new innovations, etc. That's it. Thank you very much.
Listening to you, I was fascinated to get an insight into this side of Expo I think you don't see from the pictures, and that is the meeting other people and exchanging cultural mentality and ways of doing. And I was also surprised to hear how you think that is such a large part of how Expo happens. And that you think this is such an important part of why Expo should exist. When we think of Olympic Games, we know it's a competition, and the pictures that come out of it are of competition. So we understand what's going on from the pictures. When we think of Expo pictures, it looks like presentation, a visitor in front of object. But that all that kind of exchange you're describing as the more almost more fascinating part of Expo doesn't really come out of the pictures, and it doesn't really come out of the architecture almost. So, but that kind of exchange and doing things together and listening to each other would also make a very vibrant city quarter. So the challenge, it seems, is how to create an Expo that pre-lives what that city quarter could be, and how would that be visible in the way you design and represent your project. Yeah. Do you have any examples from Expo where that happened?
I think, especially nowadays with social media, everybody wants, of course, to stand in front and pose for this iconic image of a pavilion, etc. But that means as well we have seen this all, right? You have a new iconic building, this Kuwait Pavilion, for example, this structure. Is this really Kuwait? I don't know. I didn't see Kuwait in there. This could have be anywhere, right? Playboy Bunny or whatever it is, yeah? It is a butterfly, or I don't know what they thought it might be. But is this really representing a country? No, it could also stand somewhere else. So why is it unique to be on the Expo? And I think therefore this focus on the coming together is so important. And yes, me personally, when I was there during the construction, of course we had it every day because we were sitting together, having lunch, trying to talk with the Japanese workers that don't speak English. So of course there's always the interaction that might face problems. But during the construction, it was really this group. And Expo is, what you learn is Expo is a community. They travel from Expo to Expo every 5 years. All the contractors, all the companies, they live together, they know each other. This is a really small community, everybody knows each other. And this community holds together and exchanges a lot. And then each year from all these new countries, from the new pavilions, from the hosting countries, new people come in and become part of this community for at least this half a year. But there is a lot of exchange and collaboration coming out of it, which I believe is professionally extremely rich and helpful, and of course also professionally helping for business, etc. So also this exchange, but also the visitors. We had one moment where a visitor, the pavilion director of Uzbekistan told me this, a Japanese old lady in her 80s, because our pavilion got quite hyped at one moment at the beginning, the lines suddenly were 3 hours to wait to get in, which is insane. This is something we learned. We had a timed exhibition inside, so we could only bring in 30 people every 7 minutes. So this is something we learned. This is not a good idea. The UAE pavilion had 2,000 people. No, I think, what was it? 40,000 people on the first day because you could just walk in. It was free flow. Some people only stayed for 4 minutes, but you could walk in, so there was no waiting. But this lady, she was too old to wait all this time. She came back 7 times because she wanted to enter this pavilion. And in the 7th time, the line was still long. The pavilion director took her around and inside, and for her persistency, basically, to bring her directly inside. And she lived in Osaka, and she came back, I think, 4 times more to Expo, and brought her own cooking. So she had she was so thankful to this pavilion director that suddenly a bond was created. And I think these bonds, these random connections that you meet somebody there, that you connect with somebody, is from other cultures especially is unique and is so important for us.
There's a question over there.
Thank you for the presentation. I have one question. Also thinking about the Expo here in Berlin, how could you prevent that, like regimes like UAE, maybe distract by showing a nice pavilion, showcasing a nice pavilion from like the real problems that maybe people have in that country?
In the end, Expo is a voluntary fair, right? So you cannot force a country to demonstrate what we might believe is happening there. Because yes, there are countries where I believe everybody has the same opinion of wrongdoings or wrong happenings, but there are other countries where opinions go far apart of what the society, Western, Eastern society thinks about these countries. And we see this in all the conflicts that are around the world. And I believe it is super difficult to, of course, force a country to showcase, I don't know, we had this during the World Cup in Qatar, it was, I believe, that there was a lot of media attention to the worker situations, people had died on construction sites, etc., etc. Of course, this exists. And of course, you cannot force the Qatari pavilion to showcase this. I mean, this will not happen. But I think you can. I think Expo is something. It's somewhat still about positivity, right? Each country wants to showcase themselves positive, and this we have to accept because each culture does have a lot of positive elements as well, and nobody is limited to not question critically what is happening in these countries themselves. But I think this is rather a discussion that then has to evolve out of this showcasing rather than forcing the countries to demonstrate that, yeah, there is maldoings. Because we also don't demonstrate how Germany has problems with immigrations or with immigrants, how we are racist sometimes in Germany or something like this. This is also not what we showcase. In our Expo Pavilion, we showcase how good our education is, although our education in international average is maybe not that good. But so there are a lot of facets that, of course, are more critical or more brutal, more bad. But this is never showcased on Expo. And I think this is something where the exchange has to be trying to learn from the culture and taking the positive parts of the other countries and cultures as well.
Another way of looking at it, and this is, I'm speaking of my own experience of countries you might refer to, is to get to know the people who actually live there and give you an insight into the nuanced picture of what's actually going on. And I think it's a very strong, that is a very strong way of going behind the kulisse, behind the scenery, but you only can do that if you have a chance to actually meet people from there. So I think also having a representation and getting into dialogue with them there is also a step towards doing something about having impact about what you're talking about. And not doing that and having a picture of that country which comes from the media doesn't give you the opportunity to have a nuanced opinion of what you like and what you don't like about it. So I think also to get to know the people from that country is an important, personally get to know people from that country is also an important part of it. There was another question.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I've got a very city building kind of question. How many rules, how many limitations could you possibly and realistically enforce on a pavilion? Can you tell them to have like a set height of stories? Can you tell them to have like different stories? Like, can you tell them to Brandwände? Can you tell them to hold like lines of visibility? Can you actually make a modern city out of pavilions? Can you actually tell them to like build city blocks together? Would that be possible?
To a certain extent, I believe yes. I mean, Expo. Hold on, I will try to go back to this. This one. So as you can see here, there are a lot of pavilions that are quite densely built to each other. And every building that is realized here has to follow Japanese rules and Japanese regulations, Japanese law. That means we as a designer, yeah, of course, we designed our building. We, with the Uzbek pavilion, this up here, had the unique chance that it is actually an island that is standing alone, which was one of 2 pavilions only. So all the other pavilions did have a direct neighbor. So yes, of course, the fire resistance walls, etc., if they exist in Japan, we had to build them, right? So of course, these are regulations that for urban planning and to create an after use is possible to give. The height regulations we also had. We had a restriction to 12 meters and 50% was allowed to be up to 15 meters. So there are certain regulations. When it comes to stories, this is of course depending quite heavily on the use, because I think to create an office or habitation out of the pavilion afterwards, of course you have completely different heights that you envision than you have in an expo pavilion that is exhibition. But you can foresee in the wall structure elements that you can put in a slab afterwards, for example. So there are, I think you have to find ways how to make both possible, because of course nobody wants a museum that looks like a Geschosswohnungsbau, like several apartments above each other. That is not how you envision to represent your country, to have 2.50 meter, 2.80 meter high slabs. Of course not, but you can have a wall of 5 meters and in the middle you have console, I don't know the English word, to bring in a slab afterwards, for example. So there are always solutions that you can find. So I think this is, there is a lot of possibilities to create a setting for legacy use afterwards.
I have perhaps 2 questions. First and foremost, since you spoke so much about reusing icons in a permanent way, but also promoting reusing pavilions and initially envisioned as temporary structures in a permanent way. Have you had any personal experience in that matter? For instance, has there been in projects a push, maybe from your end, but maybe also consideration in like a collaborative effort to not to keep an originally temporary structure after that, like on site? You spoke about the I think it was a kindergarten in Uzbekistan, but maybe if there has been pushes to keep pavilions or other temporary structures, maybe for exhibitions, not just in an expo space after that procedure on site?
So I think for the expo it is coming quite directly from the association, right? So in this case the Japanese Expo Association, there we don't have any say as a designer that's underneath the nation that is bringing the expo pavilion. Of course we tried to push to keep, we try to discuss, there are always these summits before the expo where all nations come together with the hosting country to discuss the structure and the infrastructure, etc., etc. But the point where we get integrated into building an Expo. Normally, an Expo has been planned for 5-10 years ahead. That means this ship has mostly sailed. But so for Expo pavilions itself, I think if the urban setting from the association doesn't give this infrastructure, then your only chance is to think of transformable, like to relocate the pavilion, to think of how can you take it apart and reuse it again. Because yes, our pavilion was a temporary structure. The Japanese built it as a temporary structure. Now, hopefully it will stand in Uzbekistan for the next 20 years. We don't know. But this is, of course, your only chance where you can relocate. We have done this in other projects in Turkey. I think we built in Ephesus, we built a museum that is on a UNESCO heritage and therefore only allowed to stay there for a certain amount of years. So it is a temporary structure. These years have passed, it's still standing there, so we hope it will remain. But this is hard for a designer to really push in such a big context for something like this. With one building in another context, this might work, but in this organizational context, it's quite hard, let's say.
Do you see a difference of the host country provided structures versus the national pavilions? Do you think that the host country provided structures could more easily be kept on site?
In this case, no. In this case, it was metal sheds. Wellblech on the top, on the sides, black sheds, steel structure underneath. It looked like storage sheds, basically. And then you put, like some pavilions, then if they had an ex-pavilion, which had such a provided shed, they put their own facade outside to basically hide this structure. But in this case, the Expo from the beginning thought we take it all apart again, right? It's these sheds we take off. Of course, you can keep storage sheds also longer, but
that could be different.
Of course, exactly. This is the chance. This is, I think, what we are discussing. No, that if you, doing an urban planning for an Expo site, you think of the permanent or of the structures that the hosting country give, which is quite a lot. All these structures here are coming. These flat roofs are coming from the Expo, right? So there is quite a high percentage of buildings that could be envisioned in being transformed into other uses afterwards. Because in the end, there's only 60, in this case, I think only 49 were realized, 49 national pavilions that had their own structure. The rest was given by Expo.
I think that's important to keep in mind. Yeah. One more.
I think this is a shorter one, a bit more technical. Since it is very hard to get a rough understanding of the scales, since we only have numbers, in those pictures you showed specifically of the Uzbek and UAE pavilions, they seem to have a very manageable scale. Maybe you can go a bit more into detail regarding the plot sizes those had.
So the Uzbek pavilion was the smallest national pavilion site with 900 square meters. And the UAE pavilion had a site of 4,000 and a building of 3,500 square meters. So this was the biggest site. And you can see here, this is the UAE pavilion, this building here. And here, this is the Uzbek pavilion. So you normally have these, you have 2 or 3 different sizes normally. I think you have it in your brief as well. You have the biggest for the richest countries that have, because there's always an investment coming or being linked to the size. So in this case, the hosting country gave an average of how much money you might need to invest to realize a pavilion there in this size, right? And then, of course, you decide what you can afford as a country and for which size you go.
Thank you so much, and thank you
Thank you.
especially for taking the time. I'm really pleased that you gave us this insight into your personal experience from Expo, which I think is unique to and different from the pictures we see. So thank you very much again.
Thank you for
Jannis
having me.
Renner.
Thank you.